morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of PTCGRadio. So today, it is time to continue our look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have found our way to Plasma Freeze, and Plasma Freeze wasn't a good set. Plasma Freeze was a flat-out, redonkulous, amazing set. I'm just going to go through a whole bunch of the cards, and at the end, you're all going to turn around and go, oh yeah, Wassy was right, that was an amazing set. Because Wassy is right, this was an amazing set. Now, we're released in Japan on December the 14th, 2012. We would have to wait till the middle of the following year, May the 8th, 2013, to get the set in English. And it was the second Team Plasma set. It's got Plasma very much in the name, and it was very much a Plasma set. Had lots of Plasma stuff in. We'll see a lot as we go through. One thing that was really kind of cool is that most, and I did get this from the lovely folks over at Bulbapedia, great website for research. If you look at a lot of the Pokemon cards, most of them had ice in the artwork. There's Litwick being a particular favourite of mine, and that is a nod to the Black and White 2 video games, where there was a whole Plasma Frigate, Kyurem freezing thing going on. I won't tell you too much in case you haven't played the games, but basically a bunch of stuff got frozen in that game, and there are card references to it, and I appreciate that very much indeed. Now, unlike in the previous set, all of the EXs that came around did get themselves full arts, and we had half a dozen of them. We had Heatran EX that was frankly meh. Nobody really cared. Thunderous EX, which was flat out amazing. We're going to talk a lot about that during this video. And similarly, Deoxys EX that was again flat out amazing. We'll talk about that as we go through the video. One more quick note that remember all the full art Plasma Pokemon do have the badge in the artwork. Now, Latias EX had an amazing ability, which basically blocked Pokemon with abilities. It was great. Latios EX stopped your opponent retreating. It wasn't out-and-out garbage. There were ways to use it, but it was generally not a great card. And then Tornadus EX was a really fun one, because it could give you a new hand, or it could do a huge amount of damage. Again, we'll get there in a moment. Like we've seen in previous sets, full art supporters were very much here, and we got full art supporters of Professor Juniper and Ghetsis. Now, Ghetsis is a new supporter we'll take a look at in a moment. Professor Juniper, of course, came around initially in the black and white base set. It's discard your hand, draw 7 cards. So we had ourselves a full art version of the best supporter card in the game. Safe to say, people loved it. Now, Ace-Specs were also back in this particular set. We got 2 of them. They were Rock Guard and Life Dew. And I am not in any way, shape or form saying that they were the best ones around, but especially Life Dew did see a bit of play and a bit of love. Now, we did actually have 6 secret rares in the set, which doesn't sound like a lot in 2021. Back then, I assure you, it was a huge amount. Now, we had 4 Pokemon. We had the Empoleon with, well, the amazing one that had Diving Draw to draw card and Attack Command. This is a card I played a lot of. I was extremely fond of it. We had the Sigilif with Safeguard that blocked Pokemon EXs. That saw a fair bunch of play, it's fair to say. The Garbodor with the Garbotoxin ability that turned off abilities, again, saw a huge amount of play. And the Garchomp, well, just the good attacking Garchomp that saw a bit of play as a fun little deck. One thing that is really cool, because we got the secret rare Altaria in a previous set, and the deck really was basically just made with Garchomp and Altaria, you could properly bling that deck out now. We did get a full art version, a gold version. It's not full art at all. It's a gold version of Ultra Ball. And given that Ultra Ball was the best Pokemon search for many years, it is again extremely fair to say that this saw a ridiculous amount of play. And then we got a gold version of Max Potion, again an item card that really did make its way into a lot of decks. So these weren't just 6 secret rares, but all 6 of them were really good, highly played cards. They were ones that people wanted. Now, the pre-release promo this time round was Metagross, And like we've come to become accustomed to, there was a pre-release deck box as well. Usual rule for people looking back to go and get these deck boxes. They are beautiful and great for collecting. Do not use them because they came flat packed and you had to construct them, and if you use them much at all, they started falling apart at the seams, literally. But they are beautiful and great for collecting. I've got all of them somewhere because I was playing obsessively a huge amount at the time. You know, unlike nowadays. I assume it's 2021 when I record this. If you're watching this many years in the future, maybe I'm not still playing, but if that's the case, I will be extremely sad. Great deck box, very flimsy, you have been warned. Now, the most expensive cards in the set, you really are looking at Empoleon and Ultra Ball. Prices are all over the place as they tend to be, but $250 is a fair guess for these cards. I should give a shout out to Garchomp, however, who generally comes in just that little bit cheaper. Now, it is a new Pokemon set, so it would be a little bit rude if we didn't have a couple of theme decks, and we did have a couple of theme decks. We had Frost Ray and Psy Crusher. Now, Frost Ray was a theme deck that was built around Glaceon with water and lightning types. And then we had Psy Crusher, which was very much built around, can you guess, Leafeon, which was very much built around your grass and psychic types. There were a bunch of EVs in the set. In fact, all the EVs. Some of them were good, some of them were not great. And I'm recording this the day after the day that EV Heroes actually comes out in Japan. So that's kind of a fun little note. So, Frost Ray then, that was the Glaceon theme deck. You got yourself a holo and a non-holo Glaceon. Holo being exclusive to the deck, it was non-holo in the set proper. And then we got non-holo rares of Raticate, Vanillux, and Electrode. Electrode being a really good card. Electrode was, again, exclusive. It was a holo in the set proper. Moving over to Psy Crusher, you got yourself a holo and a non-holo Leafeon, with the holo being exclusive. It was a non-holo in the set. And then non-holo rares of Muck, Beedrill, and Cofagrigus. No exclusive non-holos there, unfortunately. It's also extremely sad. There was a really good Cofagrigus in the set. It wasn't this one. This was the bad Cofagrigus. Always makes me sad when they do that. Now, if we move over and take a look at the best cards in the set, we have to start with Kyurem, Thundurus, and Deoxys. This was TDK, it was what the deck was known as. And this was, for a long time, one of the very best decks in the game. It was extremely hyped coming into the set, and to be blunt, it did not disappoint. Now, Kyurem was just a phenomenal attacker. 2 energy, 30 plus 1 to one of your opponent's bench. At this stage, I should remind you that Colress Machine could very, very easily get that second energy on turn 1. So you could, just on your first turn, play a Colress Machine, attach an energy, and start spreading damage around. And yes, there were 30 HP Pokemon at the time. Essentially, evolving decks using low HP evolving Pokemon really hated Kyurem. And then free energy 120 for the time was extremely efficient. Thundurus saw a lot of play in a whole bunch of decks, largely for the attack Raid and Knuckle. For 1 energy you did 30 damage and attached an energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Team Plasma Pokemon. So you would do a little bit of damage while building up your bench. However, it does not say basic energy, it says energy card, and yes, you absolutely could use this to accelerate special energy, as an awful lot of people did. It was redonk. 4 energy, 90, if you got a plasma energy, discard an energy from the defending Pokemon. That was fine. It wasn't the reason that people played it. It was Raid and Knuckle. But Deoxys may well have been the best of the three. No, scratch that. Deoxys was the best of the three, because the ability Power Connect was dumb. Your Team Plasma Pokemon's attacks, other than Deoxys EX, do 10 more damage to the active Pokemon. It made all your Plasma Pokemon do an extra 10 damage, and yes, it did stack. Now, Helix Force, you needed a Plasma Energy. Without it, you only did 30 damage. With it, you did 30 plus 30 for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon. That was alright. It punished your opponent for getting lots of energy on. You did actually hit weakness on Mewtwo here, so you did have a little bit of a Mewtwo counter coming in, but Power Connect here in any Team Plasma focused deck really did have to be considered very, very strongly indeed. They were the free cards that really defined the set, but they were far from the only good cards in the set. In fact, if we really sit down and look, there is a very strong argument that the best card in the set was Execute. Execute with its propagation ability is ridiculous. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in your discard pile, you can put it in your hand. But of course, the rule is that when it goes to the discard pile, it's a new Pokemon. So we would use this with cards like Ultra Ball, for instance, or Computer Search, or Empoleon, these cards that wanted us to discard cards from our hand, which is supposed to be a downside, and then we would just use Execute. If I have 2 Execute in my discard pile, I can use Ultra Ball or Computer Search without really discarding any cards from my hand. And because when they hit the discard, they're counted as a new Pokemon, I can play 4 Ultra Ball, and as long as I've got 2 Execute in my discard pile, I don't have to discard any other cards. It was nuts. Still a phenomenal card in Expanded. Mr. Mime had the Bench Barrier ability, and that was enough to make it a ridiculous card. Prevent all damage done to your bench Pokemon by attacks. If you are playing against decks that are spreading damage, or if you've got weak Pokemon on your bench, Mr. Mime is just phenomenal, still sees a huge amount to play. My favourite card in the set, and to be blunt, one of my very, very favourite cards ever, and yes, I mean that sincerely, is Flareon. Heat Tackle, no one cares, but Vengeance does 20 damage for 2 energy, double colourless, plus 10 more for each Pokemon in your discard pile. I'll tell you the story more fully later, but I should have won the biggest tournament in Europe piloting a deck based around this card. I ended up coming 5th on one of the most blatant and ridiculous misplays, not just that I have ever done, but I feel confident saying anyone has ever done. We would later down the line get the card Battle Compressor that let you just discard 3 cards from your deck, which would make this even better. That's when everybody jumped on the Flareon bandwagon. But I was playing Flareon before it was cool, and let's be clear, even before it was cool, I was not by a long shot the only person playing Flareon. Now, Absol was a very good card that got teched into a whole bunch of Team Plasma decks because of the attack Mind Jack. For 2 energy, you did 20 damage plus 20 more for each of your opponent's bench. So if your opponent filled up their bench, that was 2 energy, 120. Bearing in mind, again, you've got stuff like Colress Machine to accelerate energy. That was not so good. Also, this might be a good time to remind you, we had Prism Energy at the time, which was any energy when attached to a basic Pokemon. So when I'm showing you all these different basic Plasma Pokemon, they could all just use Prism Energy to pay their attacks. It was a redonkulous card. Now, Electrode was a very cool card that snuck its way into a whole bunch of decks. The ability Magnetic Draw let you draw until you had 4 cards in your hand. It was a draw engine. It was really good. Now, Jolteon did not see as much play, but Jolteon was around a little bit. 2 energy, 40 damage, but against a Pokemon EX, they can't attack next turn. So, if your opponent couldn't switch out or whatever, you could potentially buy some time. It wasn't a stunning card, but it saw a bit of play here and there. Similarly, Espeon was not a stunning card, but for 1 energy you did 20 damage and drew till you had 6 cards in your hand, or you did 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Not all these evolutions were made equal. There is not much argument that Espeon was even in the same category as Flareon, but Espeon did see a bit of play, and that was kinda cool. Speaking of which, Umbreon. Now again, Umbreon was not the best of them, but it gave all of your Plasma Pokemon an extra 20 HP. So many people tried to make Umbreon work. And it saw a bit of play here and there and a bit of success in various decks. I don't think it ever really lived up to its potential, but it was a cool tech. Now, I told you that there was a good Cofagrigus in this set, and there absolutely was. 6 feet under. Once during your turn, before you attack, you may knock out this Pokemon and put 3 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. Now, you might think giving up a prize card to drop 3 damage counters isn't good enough, and there is an argument that it's not. But remember that Flareon I have just finished gushing about, and I'm gonna definitely be gushing about in a little bit? Yeah. Essentially, this put Pokemon in your discard, which powered up Flareon's attack. The Ditto from Boundaries Crossed was particularly cool here, because you could turn it into any basic Pokemon. So you could Ditto into a basic into a stage 1, so then instead of Cofagrigus making 2 Pokemon hit the discard pile, it actually made 3 Pokemon hit the discard pile. That was a big difference. Speaking of fun cheeky rogue decks, Weavile. 2 energy, Vilify. Discard as many Pokemon as you like from your hand. This attack does 30 damage times the number of Pokemon you discarded. And the obvious partner, and even if you weren't playing at the time, I'm assuming most of you have still spotted this already, Execute. If you've got 4 Execute in your discard pile, that guarantees 120 for 2 energy, and that's before we've even gotten going. Before we searched out any other Pokemon, dropped any other Pokemon, etc. Just to begin with, we are doing 120, and bearing in mind, if you discarded 6 Pokemon, that's 180, and 180 would get a KO on pretty much any Pokemon EX for 2 prizes. This was my good friend Tommy Roberts saw a fair amount of success with this deck, as did some other players. It was a bit of a rogue gimmicky deck, but it was that rare example of one that actually worked. Speaking of gimmicks, Latias. Now, Latias is kind of a weird one, right? Because it can be played around, but not everyone actually had the cards to play around it. So the ability Bright Down said that you prevented all effective attacks, including damage, done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon with abilities. So if I'm playing an Empoleon deck and Empoleon's basically my only attacker, I can't really do very much here at all. I would be blocking Darkrai from attacking, but I wouldn't be blocking Mewtwo from attacking. So it wasn't a catch-all beat-everything deck, but it was a kind of deck where if your opponent wasn't careful and didn't have any good attackers without abilities, and there were plenty of decks that fell into that trap, you actually could just auto-win some games with Latias. And then the last Pokemon we need to give a little bit of a shout out to here is Tornadus EX. Now, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Tornadus EX had the attack Windfall, 1 colorless energy, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6 cards, and this to me falls into that beautiful category of single energy basic Pokemon, single colorless energy basic Pokemon. So you go first, or your first turn, whether you go first or second, to be honest. If you've got nothing else to do, get a new hand of 6 cards. It was great if you had a bad start. Or 4 energy, Jet Blast, 60 damage, plus 30 more for each plasma energy attached to this Pokemon. So if you just got all 4 of your plasma energy, remember special energy limited to 4 in your deck, you would actually hit 180 damage on this Tornadus. And it didn't happen often. But you could legitimately have games here where you could hit either 4 Colress Machine or 4 Colress Machine and just a plasma energy in your hand, and you could legitimately do 180 turn 1 and if you hit that incidentally, you would generally win the game. Because you would just attack a few times and your opponent wouldn't be able to win, and it would be hilarious. For the Tornadus player, not for the other player. Now, I've just told you about a whole bunch of really good Pokemon, but there were a whole bunch of really good trainer cards as well. Floatstone gave you free retreat. It was frankly ridiculous. And not only was it ridiculous that it could give any Pokemon free retreat, but remember that whole Caldeo thing I told you about? With the ability that lets it jump into the active? Yeah, Flowstone Corneo was played in an absurd amount of decks. It gave you just guaranteed switching whenever you wanted it. It was redonk. Frozen City was not quite on that same level, but whenever a player attached an energy that wasn't a Team Plasma energy, you put 2 damage counters onto that Pokemon. It was really good for just doing that little bit of extra damage. Getsis was a card that was so good it literally got banned quite a bit later in the expanded format, but still, also check out the computer screens or the monitors, or whatever you want to call them, behind Getsis have artwork from Team Plasma Pokemon cards, and I appreciate that. Your opponent reveals his or her hand and shuffles all item cards into his or her deck, and then you draw that many cards. Yet turn 1 Getsis ended games. You go first, you play a Getsis, get rid of all your opponent's item cards, and if they didn't have a supporter or a draw Pokemon in hand, a lot of the time that was enough to lose them the game. Kinda terrifying. Shadow Triad let you recover a Plasma Energy, and this was huge because, like Lugia, remember, couldn't attack unless you had a Plasma Energy to discard. We are going to see other examples as we go, but basically there were Team Plasma Pokemon that really needed Shadow Triad, and Shadow Triad was amazing. Superior Energy Retrieval discarded 2 cards from your hand. Might I remind you about Execute at this stage, and you could get 4 energy back from your discard. Yeah, this was Blastoise's like best friend. This could get you all the energy back you needed for Blastoise, and you could play it for free because of Execute. It was nuts. Team Plasma Badge was a very weird one. It was an item card, or a tool, but that is an item technically. I feel good about that. And when you attached it to a Pokemon, it made them into a Team Plasma Pokemon. So there were cool things you could do, like for instance, as soon as you're a Team Plasma Pokemon, you can use Colress Machine to accelerate energy. But one of my favourite uses for this, the lovely Tom Hall, had a good run at Worlds with Snorlax Electric. And the theory here was, Electric could accelerate energy, and you would put Team Plasma Badge on all your Electric, so that Snorlax could still do maximum damage. Snorlax did 30 for each Team Plasma Pokemon you had in play. There were some fun little tricks you could do. Team Plasma Ball was an item card that searched out any Team Plasma Pokemon, and we should know by now that if you can search out any Pokemon, it's great, and if you're playing a Team Plasma deck, this just lets you search any Pokemon. It's like Ultra Ball, but you don't have to discard, which is clearly nuts. Life Dew was the better of the ace specs in this particular set. It stopped you giving up a prize. So single prize Pokemon wouldn't give up a prize, and 2 prize Pokemon EXs would only give up a single prize. That's still kind of cool. Sableye was probably the best use for this, because remember, Sableye's Junk Hunt could actually just recover this and use it over and over again. And now, it wasn't a card we had yet. It was a card we would get down the line, but it really is worth pointing out now. We would later get Puzzle of Time, which was an item card, and if you played 2 of them, you could put any cards back from your discard pile into your hand. So you can actually use Sableye to always recover Puzzle of Time, and you would just get into this loop where your opponent KOs Sableye, Life Dew means you don't give up a prize, and then next turn you Puzzle of Time and reattach it, and your opponent never takes a prize. Rock Guard was not as good. Rock Guard, you attach it to a Pokemon, and if they took damage, you put 6 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. It was like treble Rocky Helmet. It wasn't terrible. People played it, but there were usually better ace specs. Now, in terms of the best decks that came around from this set, we've got to start off with TDK. Thunderous, Deoxys, Kyurem. Now, Kyurem was your main attacker here, and you had Deoxys to do more damage, and Thunderous to accelerate energy. But with Deoxys bumping up the power, Thunderous became a good attacker as well. Absol was a great little tech there, as we mentioned previously. You would use a combination of Hypnotoxic Laser and Verbank City Gym to do extra damage with poison and, maybe occasionally get a lucky sleep flip. You would have Lugia as a nice little tech. Remember, Lugia took extra prizes. Chorus Machine was a big card for accelerating energy. Prism Energy was huge for all your different type of attackers. And Plasma Ball obviously was a great search card because it searched out any Pokemon you wanted. Now, Flareon Cofagrigus was a very fun deck, and honestly, there's not a huge amount more to say about it than I've already said. You would use Cofagrigus to drop a few damage counters, and then Flareon to smash, taking advantage of the fact that Cofagrigus was putting extra Pokemon in your discard pile. But I do need to mention Ordino quickly, that's the one we mentioned before. If it's in your hand, you can essentially discard it to heal 10 and remove a special condition. Or basically whack it in the discard pile to do extra damage with Flareon. And like I mentioned earlier, Ditto was huge in this deck, partly because it was just more Pokemon that hit the discard with Cofagrigus, but also Ditto could turn into either Cofagrigus or Flareon, and when you're playing a multiple stage 1 deck, that can be absolutely huge. Now, Weavile Execute was another deck that came around from this particular set. It was one of those that really did write itself. You would just be using Execute to constantly fuel Weavile's attack, hoping that if you needed to do a bit of extra damage, you could get a couple extra Pokemon into your hand. Dark Patch became very important here because Weavile had a 2 energy attack, so Dark Patch would pay the other one of them. I know that technically Weavile is a Team Plasma Pokemon, but it wasn't a deck where you wanted to use Chorus Machine. Dark Patch was far, far better here. Also, Getsis was great because this was a deck that took a little bit of setup, but then could just run through you. So Getsis to buy some time was kind of huge. And Sableye was a great card here, just so that when those times when you were setting up, you had a great option, and you're playing a Darkness deck, so it fit in there quite nicely indeed. Now, Lugia actually kind of made its own deck at this stage, and it really was a deck that was built around Lugia and the ability to let you take extra prizes. And the theory was, you've still got Thundurus to accelerate energy, you need to get Lugia going. You've still got Deoxys to do extra damage, but you've also got cards like Plus Power, because you needed to get KOs. Remember, every time you are attacking with Lugia, you're discarding an energy. So you need to be taking KOs here. So being able to use stuff like Plus Power and Deoxys could legitimately get you to one-hit KO EXs, which was kind of amazing. And obviously Thundurus just to get you going in the early game was pretty important. Chorus Machine obviously was great for accelerating energy. Frozen City was good here, but you had to be careful. Your opponent could use Frozen City to self-KO and avoid giving up an extra prize here. I know that sounds weird, but if your opponent needs to take 2 prizes to win, you could self-KO the almost KO'd single prize Pokemon, so your opponent had to go through an EX to win the game. Now, my deck I mentioned earlier was a counter deck, and I consider this to be one of the very few times I made a proper top deck. Now, it was all built around Flareon, because at the time we're a couple set, well, like 1 or 2 sets ahead at this stage, but Virizion decks were huge. Flareon smashed Virizion. In top 32 of the tournament, I played the eventual winner, who was playing Virizion Genesect, and I won 2 games in 15 minutes, not through any massive skill, because the matchup is that gosh darn favourable. We then had Leafeon in the deck, which was a phenomenal counter to Keldeo. We had Zoroark in the deck, that was a phenomenal counter to Black Kyurem. You could copy their attack for a double colourless energy, and then KO them, which was kind of hilarious. I enjoyed it greatly. I played Drifblim, both of the Drifblim, because there were a couple really good ones, to counter Plasma Pokemon, because like I've said, Plasma were really reliant on special energy, And then there was a Stunfisk in there as well. I don't think we've gotten to Stunfisk yet. But for a single energy, it did 20 to the active and 20 to one of your opponent's bench. It was really good against electric decks and also just for spreading some damage around in the early game. It was a surprisingly good card. No, I'm lying to you, ladies and gentlemen, we have seen it. It was in Dragons Exalted. It was years ago, right? It's hard to remember. And basically, the deck just had hard counters to Blastoise decks, Darkrai decks, Plasma decks, and Virizion Genesect decks, which at the time was the vast majority of the metagame, and I just played against a bunch of those decks. Got all the way to top 8, played against Tord Reklev's Darkrai deck, and I told you it was an incredible misplay, and I've told this story in videos before, but for anyone that's not heard it, there was a tool at the time called Silver Bangle. Let you do an extra 30 damage to EXs. Great in a non-EX deck like this. It would come in the following set. And after the tournament, Tord sent me a message going, hey, why did you attach Silver Bangle to your benched Pokemon? And it turns out I attached Silver Bangle to the bench, not the active. If I attach to the active, I win the game. But I'd had very little sleep, and I literally just attached the tool to the wrong Pokemon. That lost me the top 8 game. Top 4 would have been Virizion Genesect. I've already told you how crazy favourable that matchup was. And the final would have been Darkrai, which was exactly the same as Tord's deck. And I was able to beat Tord in top 32 and lost in top 8 on a ridiculous game-losing misplay. So I've not had huge success in tournaments often, but this should have been my biggest tournament win I ever took. And I didn't on a silly misplay. But that's not the point. The point is that Flareon Toolbox deck was legit. And if I can't talk about it when I'm doing a history video, which brought me like the main cards in the deck, when can I, ladies and gentlemen? When can I? And for anyone wondering, yes, it has been 7 years since that tournament. And it still haunts me. That should have been my biggest win ever. Never mind, ladies and gentlemen. This is how we learn. Right, that was Plasma Freeze. Plasma Freeze was amazing, but now it's over to you guys. I want to know your memories of the set if you played. I want to know your thoughts about the set, seeing it now if you didn't. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.